And our next topic is broadcasting and complex crossroads. I would like to invite Joe Morrison on the stage, football presenter with over 20 years of broadcast experience. Please give him a round of applause. And I would like to invite Pedro Correa and Rahat Kulshestra to join us virtually. And the moderator for this session would be Colonel S.D. Sharma, sports medicine specialist and an ardent follower of football.
That is broadcasting and the crossroads. Along with me, Pedro Correa has joined from UAE, and Rahat is there. I hope, Rahat, you are there with us. Hi, Rahat. You are not audible. The audio is not there.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Very good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, so Rahat is head of Quidditch. They provide the innovative solutions from the broadcasting zone. Pedro is there from the UAE, and he is part of the UAE Pro League presentation. I will straightforward start with Joe. Joe, the game, how we see and how ultimately we'll experience is basically a major connector with the game, even for the viewer as well as for the grower. So how you are seeing that this spectrum is changing because of the newer trends of maybe OTT platform or direct to customer kind of a service. So how the traditional broadcasting is shaping up at this moment?
Yeah, it's a great it's a great question, and it's something that anyone who sits here and says they know what's coming in the next 5 or 10 years is a liar. We don't. The industry is fragmented so much. The platforms are multiple now. Obviously, you know that I was working with Facebook and their partnership with La Liga over the last 3 years. So direct to consumer, I think, is the future for any product or any sport, and in particular football, that is established. But at the beginning, you have to use the platforms to get exposure. So if you don't have that broadcast, if you don't have that live stream of the league, of the tournament, you don't have a product. If you can't see Leo Messi, we don't know what Leo Messi is. We don't know who Leo Messi is. So that is the starting point. And in terms of it fragmenting, I think, there was rumors that the Premier League were going to take a chance on Singapore in this last right cycle. They didn't. Maybe they'll do it next. But they were going to go direct to consumer with their own product. So instead of having a multitude of traditional broadcasters where you buy the sports package, that I think will disappear over time. So whatever the league is, whatever the tournament is, they will go direct to the consumer with their own product. You're already seeing it with F1 TV in certain territories. I think that's the way it's going. But in terms of where it will be exactly, that's just my guess because I cannot predict the future. And like I say, anyone sitting in this position cannot either.
Thank you. So moving on to Pedro. Pedro, basically the presenter adds the value. It is almost like the salt in the food which brings the taste, and the viewer are the consumer. So how you prepare for a match before the match as a presenter? I am talking about specifically a football match.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me on board. I would say that question could also be asked to Joe because he has a lot more experience than me in the field. But in any case, and talking specifically about football, I think when you're commentating on a football match, which is what I do in this case, unlike Joe that can do many other stuff, you need to prepare well. You need to know well the teams because basically you will be telling a story. The story is, of course, unfolding on the screen and everyone can watch it. But when you're commentating on it, you're kind of putting a wrap around it. And the way you wrap it is also very, very important. The amount and the quality of the data that you are providing, and also the analysis that you are providing about the teams, about the coaches, about the players' history, the coaches' history, eventually the coaches and the player styles, if you can get that deep. I think it's very important because it will enhance the experience to the viewer. And as Joe said, nowadays we are going in a different direction. Linear TV, traditional TV is still there, but more and more we are going into an OTT platform era, I think, and I believe, and that will provide lots of engagement with the viewers. And the better we provide the data, the better analysis we can provide, the better the experience will be for sure for the viewers.
Okay, you want to add anything, Joe?
Yeah, Pedro's right. I think what's changed in my 20 years is when I first started, as long as you wore a suit and you had a big smile and you could read the autocue, that was all that's required. That's not the case anymore. Now you need to have a personality, you need chemistry on screen. Why? Because that's going to keep your audience longer watching, whether in this particular case we're talking about football, watching the game, getting them in earlier to watch before kickoff, keeping them at half time, and then keeping them at the end of the game after the final whistle is gone to get that engagement that Pedro is talking about and get that reaction. Now, why do you need all of that? Well, the watch time determines how much time you've got to put your advertisements, your sponsors in there, and you spoke this morning, it's all about the money, and that's important. So just being a suit on TV, and I can never understand suits, by the way, because I have never in all the years that I've gone to football as a fan seen people in the stands wearing suits, so I don't know where that came from. But all of that is disappearing. The personality, the character, the chemistry now is so important. And as Pedro pointed out, very rightly, the story, because that data that Pedro was talking about, I can get that on my phone whilst I'm watching the game. What I can't get is I can't get those little stories about the players that only a commentator or a presenter might know because they're in the industry.
Rahat, you are part of a innovation hub which provides the solution for the broadcasting domain. Let us something more how you feel that the technology is basically giving additional advantage for the viewers to get a better experience.
Yes, very good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. It's actually quite interesting what technology is being able to do for sport, because, sport traditionally is just something that is played on the field, but what technology is doing, I think, is playing two very important parts. One is obviously, like you mentioned, in the broadcast, and the other is actually, the rule making and being able to follow the rules. And I think those are two very critical places where technology is playing an important part. I think from the broadcast perspective, as Pedro mentioned, I think the whole game is really around storytelling. It's really around how technology can come in and add pieces to the puzzle that support the broadcasters, support the commentators in the story that they're trying to tell of the game. We've worked with things like augmented reality. In fact, on the UAE Pro League itself, we had something called a buggy camera, which kind of goes in and really gets you into the action, gets the viewer closer in. And, I think the effort is constantly to be able to take the viewers and give them an experience that's bringing them closer and closer into the game and into the action. So I think from a storytelling perspective, what technology is doing with adding analytics and more data, and again, like Pedro mentioned, now with OTT coming in, it's not just a one-way communication. That communication with the data is now a two-way communication where the user can actually ask for specific kinds of intelligence and specific kind of data. And I think it's all really lending to improving the viewer's experience. And then on the other hand, the technology that we're working on is actually around decision making of the game. And I think that's a really other exciting part of technology in sport, where you're now being able to use analysis of fielding positions, VAR, ball tracking, to be able to really understand what's going on in the game and how technology can actually take away biases to be able to take better decisions. And I think those are really two places where, technology is going to continue to play a very strong part.
Yes, surely the experience side, decision-making side, yes, I think Joe wants to add a few things.
No, he's absolutely right. I was just going to say that as cameras get smaller, as the technology becomes more minute, I think you'll see more wearable technology. So that instead of just the cameras around the pitch, and obviously we're getting spider cams and drone cams now, instead of just that, you'll see actually wearable technology where cameras are on the players, so you can get a player's eye view.
Absolutely.
And a referee, it's already happening, but in a GoPro form.
Yeah. So, moving on to the next question, I will ask Joe. We all say that we have to know our customer, their behavior, so that we can create a product better. So, in terms of broadcasting, what are the major customer interest point you can just define for your so long career in the broadcasting domain as a presenter? A broadcasting company should focus on.
Well, you know what the strange thing is? Up until working with Facebook and La Liga, whenever we completed a show, I would sit down with the executive producers and we'd chat about the content, how we felt it went, but that was pretty much it. When it came to Facebook, all of a sudden, there was this immediate data coming in, which we would then analyze and say, right, what were the points of the show whereby the interaction shot through the roof? So an obvious one is when Leo Messi's involved. Very, very simple and easy example. Now, all of a sudden then, we have to start formatting the shows based on the data that was coming in, instead of Joe Morrison's feelings about what was good in the show and what was bad. And that was a huge sea change for me, especially because I've been so long in broadcasting that it's changed hugely by immeasurable levels, not just from technology, but from all aspects. So then it was a case of, right, now we're seeing patterns of what the audience is looking at and what the audience wants. And then we moved on to things like the engagement and saying, audience wants to be closer and closer to my two pundits who are ex-players, who are big stars. They want to be closer and closer to that. And that's what we did. We took them closer so they could ask the questions. In this auditorium over the weekend, we've had sessions where people in the seats up back there can ask questions. They want to feel part of it. They want to sit here in Joe Morrison's seat and ask the questions as a presenter. And why shouldn't they do that? And that's where the technology will come in, that's where the engagement comes in. But to get that, you need to know what the analytics are so you know where to focus on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the situation has changed where just a viewership is not sufficient or enough for me to engage, and I want to ask, and the platform has to give those things, and the points has to be known.
I mean, just to add to that, the biggest thing we found was pre-shows, which were always the longest part of a football show, became shorter and less relevant. Because a pre-show originally was where you got your information about the team. Now, the information about the team is on my mobile phone.
Yes.
And it's there 3 or 4 hours before kickoff.
Yes.
What became more important was the post-show, because a referee indecision, a goal, a red card, something that the fans were furious about or happy about.
Yeah.
So we extended the post-shows to get more fan reaction in. That was a huge change for me, because I was always on the traditional belief, which was the pre-show was the most important.
Build up, yeah. So moving on to Pedro, just taking a cue from here. Once it is a football show and you are a presenter, how much necessary it is for you to understand the tactical aspects of the football quite well?
In the case of the UA Football Show, I'm the analyst. The presenter is my colleague Graham Clues. It's very important, of course, to know the game. When you talk about the game, you need to know the game as much as you can, and I try to do that. I was involved as a football player during the youth system, through the youth system of my club. I've never made it to professional, but I always try to learn as much as I can about the game. I think it's very important to add that in-depth analysis to the game in order to engage, because it's a common word we are using a lot. The engagement nowadays it's a lot more important than just the simple viewership of numbers, because even the numbers sometimes will not tell the whole story, as we all know. So the viewership is the engagement is very important, and in that sense I believe the more you know about the game, in this case football, the better you can provide both in terms of tactical analysis, in terms of the playing style of the coaches, in terms of the strategies they use, even the common substitutions that they usually do according to the moment of the match. This is also very interesting because I found out that after doing many matches of a certain coach, you you almost can guess what he's going to do next because there is a pattern in his thinking, and all this I think it's very important again to illustrate the match and to try to tell that story to the people watching to understand better what's going on, to engage better, and to keep following us for the upcoming weeks and rounds.
Pedro, before I move on to Rahat, I'll just take a bit of extra leeway with you. Once you see that there is a match happening and you are doing maybe the presentation and you are doing a tactical analysis kind of a situation, do you feel that if there is a coach sitting around you is easier for a presenter?
I think it's interesting, of course, to have a coach or even to have a former player. I think it's interesting, of course, but it's as Joe said before. We were used to, and even nowadays, there's still a trend somewhere where you see many presenters and analysts wearing a suit and being very formal. Like Joe, I also believe that, of course, TV and public communication implies some formality, but in case of sport, I believe you should try to take it as light as possible. And in that sense, the fact that you bring on board a coach and a player, it's good if he can be also a good communicator, because if he can't, and some people have this problem, then it will not work very well. So it's important. I think it's interesting in any case because we are talking about the people that are involved in the game directly. They are down there in the dugout. They were inside the pitch, so they can add, of course, some items, some information into the mix that, of course, we, being out of the game, that we might not know or we might skip. But in any case, I think the fact that being a good communicator is also very important. It's not only what you know, it's also the way you can communicate what you know.
Absolutely, yeah. I would add to that obviously I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of ex-players, and as Pedro points out, not all of them are great communicators. Not all of them are characters. Not all of them can get the message across on screen. They can get the message across in a dressing room or with their teammates, but they can't do it when it comes to a studio. And what still amazes me to this day is how many are comfortable playing in front of 60, 70, 80,000 stadiums, but as soon as you put them under the lights in a studio, they're very scared. And I think it's important to point out, because I'm a big follower of UFC and Dana White, and his whole principles and concept of UFC in its early years, when it was a very niche sport. And this is something that's important for certainly district leagues and state leagues here in India. If you don't have that automatic audience, because it's very niche, you have to think outside the 15%, as Dana White calls it. So 15%, as he recognized, of MMA fans would watch fight because they were obsessed by MMA. It doesn't matter who was fighting, didn't matter what level, they would watch. That's not who you're trying to attract. That's not who you're targeting. You're targeting the 85% who, for example, here in India is a classic case. I meet many fans as I'm going around who only watch the World Cup every 4 years. They never watch the Premier League, they never watch La Liga, they never watch the Indian national team even, but they watch the World Cup every 4 years. That's the 85% that you have to target. How do you do that? Well, one of the things is making sure, as Pedro said, that character that you put on screen, and it's the presenter as well as the pundits, are engaging, that they're exciting, they've got a bit of chemistry, they're fun, there's some humor in there, they're entertaining. Because those are the ones that you're trying to attract into the game to add to your 15%.
Sure. Rahat, you are part of an experience which you have created with in the final of IPL using drone technology, if I am not wrong. Correct me if I am wrong.
No,
Rahat?
that's correct. Absolutely.
Okay. But once we talk as a football ecosystem, it is not exactly the step brotherly feeling, but we always say that something happening with cricket, why not with football? So, Rahat, what do you see? How quickly or how soon you see that the drone and the experience will come in the Indian football in terms of viewership and broadcasting package?
So I think it's already happening. It's happening slower because football viewership, in terms of the way the broadcast is designed, is slightly more traditional, and the number of people watching the sport across the globe, technology is slowly creeping in. But I think what the drone is able to do for the broadcast is actually quite interesting. It kind of just takes you slightly outside and gives you this much larger than life kind of perspective of the stadium environment. So typical broadcast, everything's happening from inside, and you can see all the all the action from camera one. But the moment you kind of just step out a little bit and see this really large drone shot, you get a really good sense of where the game is happening, what stadium it's happening in, what the stadium looks like in the context of the city. And I think really coming back to the point of storytelling, it's really about bringing the viewer into the action, bringing the viewer into the game, making them feel that relatability. Just the way Joe was saying, the commentators are able to draw them in. Our job is to use technology and see how visually we can draw the viewer in. So I think drones are able to do that in one context. I think to what you were mentioning with what we did during the IPL finals is taking it to a whole different level, which is using augmented reality on top of drones to be able to make it more and more engaging and more exciting for the viewers. So for the finals of the IPL, we had this eagle that flew in and converted the whole Ahmedabad stadium into a bird's nest, and we did this whole reveal of the trophy. And it's experiences like that just create more and more ways for the audience to feel connected. And now what we're doing with the augmented reality in football is actually now taking the data from different providers that you can see heat maps, you can see possession data, and the moment you've got this drone shot, you can overlay this data on top of the stadium to be able to give the viewers again an experience of being able to visualize that data in more ways that they can connect with the data, what's going on. So I think it's happening slowly, and I think with OTT platforms pushing really hard on technology innovation, it's helping us take this technology into football and deploy across across the globe.
Okay, I'll come to Joe with a different question here. Joe, we know that sponsorship is really important, but for a viewer, once there is a continuity of experience and in between those sponsors come, what do you feel? Is it something which is basically disturbing and losing the numbers or viewership? Or at times, if the advertisement is quite engaging enough and the brand is quite known enough, it can even hold your viewers?
Great question, and I think the best example is probably the Super Bowl, isn't it? Those adverts in the halftime slots of the Super Bowl are the most expensive advert slots in global sport. But you're absolutely right. What they've done with the Super Bowl is they've made those adverts almost mini films, and they're very entertaining. Quite often they're funny. And that keeps the audience in, and it's you're selling your brand. Of course you're selling your brand, but at the same time you're getting people to watch it instead of just getting up, going to the toilet, going to have a chai, whatever you're going to do. I think that it has to be more multi-dimensional instead of legacy TV, which is just there's your ad break and you just fill it with as many ads. I did a tournament not many years ago where the walk-in ad break, and for those who don't know, the walk-in ad break is the ad break just before kickoff. So it's the most important one. Why? Because you have the most eyeballs. It was 9 minutes long. 9-minute walk-in ad break. That is just losing your audience. Who is going to sit and watch 9 minutes of ads just before kickoff? And that's because they're not thinking through the experience, as you pointed out. So getting that, how do you take the sponsorship money, which is very important, as we've discussed this weekend? How do you connect it to the advertising? And how do you make that then palatable for the audience to keep them and so they see your message? You don't want them switching off.
Pedro, I'm coming to you. in fact, you and Joe both, what will be your advice for any future presenter? Few characters or few qualities they must adopt to make the broadcasting and the viewership quite exciting.
Well, first and most of all, being able to communicate, having that will, having that passion to communicate. Then knowing the game that you're talking about. In this case, football, can be other sports. Joe mentioned the MMA. Whatever you are calling on, make sure that you know as much as you can. Then being passionate, I think it's also interesting, of course, because whenever we do something out of passion, it might work better, I would say. But mostly, and most of all, knowing the game, understanding well the context where you are in. If you are, for example, in the case of the UAE Pro League, I've been doing it now for 6 years. You start to know the stories behind each coach, behind each player. You start to understand that so well that it will come naturally out of you to the audience, and then the audience will engage with that, will understand that, will feel that. So I think it's very important to keep a track on things in terms of football nowadays. It's under constant development. Broadcasting also under constant development. So it's very important also to keep track of things, to try to understand where we are going. As Joe said, nowadays, we don't know exactly where we will be in 5 years, but we all have the feeling that this will go somewhere into the OTT more and less into the linear TV as it has been for the last 30, 40 years. So it's very important to understand those trends and to understand what's the best way to communicate with the audience. Because again, as Joe said, the fact that nowadays, through these new platforms, the fact that we are getting the feedback back into us, we can understand better how we can somehow put the product out there and somehow to illustrate better the matches and to provide the analysis. You can understand better what the audience or the audiences, I would say, because nowadays we have many different audiences. We have a younger audience that I believe wants everything fast. So short clips, short analysis. It's it's the social media audience. 2-minute clips with the analysis, and that's it. So if you, like Joe said, a 9-minute ad, it's too much. If anything, I would say anything above 2 minutes, it's too much. So you need to keep it as short as possible. Then you have an audience in their 40s, 50s, like myself, that we were brought up watching the initial days of the Premier League, where you had all those legends, some of them still up today working on the field, where you can have a deeper analysis. Maybe you can have longer versions of the clips, and then you have the older audience. Of course, these ones eventually will have it in the traditional way, and I think it's important in the end is to understand who are you targeting, and according to that to understand how can you cater to this audience.
Joe, your take, advice for the newcomers?
Chemistry. Without question, chemistry. Your own personal chemistry. Chemistry, most importantly, with your guests and colleagues that are on the screen with you. Really, really important. I keep coming back to personality as well. To be a TV personality, you first got to have a personality. And there's a lot of people I see on mainstream professional broadcast in other parts of the world that they're flat, they're blank, they're dead, they're dull. So do you want to sit and watch that? We're doing the best job in the world. It's a fabulous job. We're so privileged. And you just want to sit there and look, like someone slapped you in the face? No, of course not. So it's important to get that chemistry and to get that energy going on the screen, because we're the build-up to the main event. And that's something that through all of my years of broadcasting, I think gets lost on a lot of presenters. I've done it myself in the past, so I'm guilty as well. You think you are the star. You're not. Leo Messi is the star. Barcelona are the stars. Manchester United, well, maybe he's not Manchester United at the moment. Stop laughing. Arsenal, on a serious note, Manchester City, Arsenal, they're the stars. You're just the build-up, the warm-up act. You're the act that goes on before the big band comes on stage and does their concert. So energy, a bit of personality, a bit of character, inject some enthusiasm and some entertainment into that.
Surely, the session is on broadcast and viewership, and we cannot unnecessarily overextend and shoot the time limit, because that is not supposed to be allowed in a session which is on broadcasting and viewership. So I'll just quickly finish it here, but before I go, I'll just take one bite from Rahat. The question is that you are part of technology and hardware, and football is an external game. How you feel that the environmental factors can play a major role in your planning?
So I think that's a very important question, and I think as part of when as viewers we watch the game, I think it's very easy for it to go unnoticed, the amount of effort and the amount of things going on in the back. The size of the team that goes behind putting out one proper broadcast, and the amount of technology and different pieces of the puzzle that come together is actually pretty fascinating to see behind the screen. And I think putting all of those things together when it comes to, environmental factors, anything and everything can, go wrong to be able to make all of those things work or not work. And I think just to see the amount of effort from broadcasters that go in, from the number of cameras on the field, from, fiber connectivity being put up and then backups for that, power connectivity being put up and backups for that. I think it's pretty phenomenal what goes on just to be able to make that experience happen. The hundreds of people behind the cameras and behind the BCR that are sitting just to press those buttons and make that experience happen for, the viewers sitting back at home. It's just phenomenal to see how all of those different pieces of the puzzle come together. And I think at every stage, the broadcaster, because there's so much riding on it from from the brand's perspective, from the money that's riding on all of these sports, the amount of backups and the amount of, contingencies that have to be built in for every step is quite a lot. And I think, we, as viewers, when we're watching the game, we totally miss it. So, the environmental factors play a fairly large role in the broadcast coming through. But I think with the amount of experience that has gone into creating these broadcasts now, all of those are fairly mitigated for, and it's quite exciting to get everything on air.
Thank you, Rahat. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Petra. We have just finished the session, and GSC 3.0 shares extreme pleasure to have you all on this session. And on GSC 4.0, hopefully at Bhubaneswar, we all will meet once again. Thank you.
Indeed, changing the way we look at sports, isn't it? Thank you so much, Dr. Das, and thank you so much all our panelists for joining us here.